The line, red carded, they say they should not hold public office. Is that fair?
One, I think let's backtrack to the fact that the constitution that we have has very specific provisions about the standards that should be met by persons who offer themselves for public office. And it is in that context that civil society was coming from. And I think it's only legitimate that civil society, just like any other citizen, presents their views in terms of who they think is or is not entitled to hold office. I think the only challenge comes when it is not very clear the basis on which you choose the few that you choose. Because then you can be accused of playing either populist politics, you know, because you know X resonates with the people if you say X is corrupt. From the report says that they got 1,000 or something complaints. They have picked 20. The problem with the list is that if you look through the list, it includes different classes of people. It includes people over whom the thing just says the allegations. It then includes people there who have been convicted. It includes there people who are going through a process, you know, whether in parliament or elsewhere. It then excludes, you know, a whole swath of people who are even convicted. Let me give you an example. It includes Elizabeth Ogora, I think it is, as having been involved in violence. It excludes people who are actually taken to court for violence. So you then wonder, why would you pick X and leave out Y? And I was saying that it is very important on a matter as serious as integrity that you manage it so carefully so that you're not accused of pursuing the same conversation where corruption and the allegations of corruption have sometimes been used to pursue other objectives. You've got to be very careful. Because when you do that, the corrupt hide behind under there, you know? So I was saying if civil society wants to push this agenda, they must be very, very careful to be seen to be objective, to be seen to have a theme. So that, and that theme, when I look at that list, I should be able to say, yes, the reason why X is here and Y is not here is because of the following. If that is not clear, then it looks like populism and posturing. Number two is that let's not forget that our constitution is also a constitution that protects rights. It's not, you see, when you talk about human rights defenders, what are human rights? Human rights are also the rights of the accused. You know, you know, the accused has the protections of the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. They have the right to have what is called fair administrative action, that you must ensure that they go through due process. You must ensure that they have all those protections. If you don't do that, then you're breaching the same constitution that you're talking about protecting. And I think that is my problem. When the constitution, for example, says that for you to be stopped from holding public office, two things need to happen. One is that you need to have been convicted, yeah, of a crime involving probity. And the chances of appeal have been exhausted. Why is that? It's to ensure that you don't people take through a process when the courts have not determined their guilt fully. So that's number one. The other thing that it says is that, again, if you have been guilty of the breach of Chapter 6, but again, it doesn't leave it open. It says, even then, you need to have been found to have been guilty through a process of law. And you've exhausted your chances of appeal. Which means the Constitution, in its wisdom, allows space for someone over who allegations have been made to be granted constitutional protections. If we don't allow those constitutional protections, Jeff, what will happen? Yes, we'll catch a few guilty people, but we'll also throw in a lot of innocent people, because people will carry out personal vendettas on the guise of fighting corruption. So yes, the problem with the protections of law is that some guilty people will get away with it. But let's remember that it is more serious if we allow some innocent people to be caught in that trap. So let us, unfortunately, the messy process of the due process of law, we must allow it. If we don't, that we're heading towards anarchy, and that can be very, very dangerous. So number two, let's have a theme. If you're going to allege people should be stopped because of corruption, let's have a consistent, objective theme. So that when I look at Jalango there, I can know, yes, that's because 1, 2, 3 has happened. And when I look at the next person, the same theme. If, however, I have 10 themes, for example, I say, anyone who's been mentioned in the Auditor General's report, there are 50 people mentioned, I pick one. Why do I pick that one? So number two, let us allow people the protections of law. We cannot be more protective of human rights than the Constitution. We can't have higher standards than the Constitution. The Constitution may be messy, we may not like it, but that is our Constitution for now. And as long as those protections in the Constitution exist, we must insist on them. Now, the reality is that even with those constitutional protections, there are many people actually who should be removed. But everybody else, unfortunately, it's unfortunate, and there are many people who will go in who we know are corrupt, but they are entitled constitutional protections. If we don't go there, Jeff, where will we stop? Who else shall we deny the protection of
But
protection?
Chapter 6 of the Constitution, does that mean it's null and void? It hasn't worked then?
I think it has, because we're having this conversation. You know, the truth of the matter is ultimately integrity is not a matter of law. You see, there's a certain naivety Kenyans have that the law will finally solve all our problems. You know, and that the way to resolve societal problems is to criminalize, is to stop, is to do this. Actually, societies, a lot of societies for where the corruption whatever are very low, you will not find even the sort of very strict laws and institutional setup that Kenya has. But here we have assumed that the way to stop corruption is create more and more institutions, have more and more law, while what we have is a very deep societal problem. And the reality is that the more we discuss this, the more we make this an important national conversation, is actually part of transforming society. So let's not assume that the way we transform society is by jailing people and stopping people from doing this. But it's actually part of having the conversation about how much we value ethics, how much ethics is important in our national discourse, how much ethics is important in leadership. That conversation is important. So chapter 6 is not worthless, but there is only so far that chapter 6 can take us. And it is not going to take us if we're going to allow the sort of, partisan posturing that has been there in this conversation. So yes, let us apply chapter 6, but let us apply it in the fullness of the Constitution. Not just pick one clause and say we talk about, but we exclude other provisions of the Constitution that provide protection.
Bottom line, do you say let the people decide? Even if it's our thief, we'll elect our thief.
We're very patronizing on the Kenyan voter. We think we know better than the Kenyan voter. Sometimes they can see through the lie. Sometimes they can see through the lie. And sometimes they actually don't care. Sometimes they will tell you, at the end of the day, this is a better leader than that one. And they understand it. And we must ask ourselves, at what point do we allow personal responsibility? At which point shall we tell the voter that, if you elect Jalango, there are consequences to electing that Jalango? At what point do we draw that line? And what the Constitution has done is to say, it is not to say anyone, even our thief, but to say, unless that thief has been convicted, unless that thief has been found culpable within a legal process, let that person let the people be the final determinant. That was the same conversation in 2013, that William Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta had been accused of very serious crimes.
Correct.
But people said, until they have been taken through that process, let the people decide until that time. So we are not saying that anyone, whatever they have done, willy-nilly, let them be allowed on the ballot. But for as long as we are complying with the threshold set in the law, beyond there, let people decide. Otherwise, what will happen is that if a group of us stand up and start saying Jeff Koinange is a thief, Jeff Koinange is a thief, Jeff Koinange is a thief, then we decide, no, Jeff Koinange should not be allowed to stand. We must ensure that we also do not allow a situation where people are using that conversation to achieve
malice.
Yeah. And you and I know it happens.
Sure.
I don't know whether, Jeff, you noticed the conversation in the Senate last week.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you noticed. If you noticed, there were 2 senators who were offering themselves for gubernatorial positions, and they were pushing to ensure that their competitors are locked out by virtue of the report of the same house.
Yes.
So we have to
Irony.
so we have to be very careful in pushing this envelope.
I think it's the mob justice mentality. Like you keep saying, if you keep hammering the same issue, people believe it.
People believe it, and we have had, people forget, we are very, and that's what we're very poor students of history. In the early 90s and in the early 90s, late 80s, we had enemies of the state until people believed that certain people are not entitled to protections of law because there were enemies of the state. There were treason, there were people seditionists, and they were fighting government. And in the psyche of people, you remember people could even talk about will cut their fingers if they raise 2 fingers for multiple.
Yes.
And there was an acceptance. There was a certain societal acceptance that if you oppose government, you are actually an enemy of the people. The protections of law became very, very important. If you do not allow protections of law against even those we think are guilty, then even the innocent are going to be punished. So let us ensure that even as we push the issue of integrity, and it's important that that integrity must be within the law as the law is today.
Wow. That's deep.